Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into a world where the air itself feels ancient, where the sky blushes over the Nile before you've even rubbed the sleep from your eyes, and where you, yes you, are about to discover just how dramatically unready you are for life in ancient Egypt. You stand on a thin mat in a mud brick room still holding the night's coolness, and before you even breathe twice, you already sense that this place demands more from your body, your patience, and your sandals than any modern Monday ever has. The air smells like river mist and dust, your eyes haven't adjusted yet, and somewhere outside, a donkey is announcing that it woke up before you did. And honestly, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I love seeing all those dots from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push open the door of your tiny house, and dawn spills over you like molten gold. The light is soft at first, brushing your face as though the sun is politely warning you about the heat it plans to unleash later. You step outside and the ground is still cool beneath your feet. One small kindness in a land that rarely does kindness for free. The river glimmers just beyond the reeds, whispering through tiny ripples the way it has for thousands of years. You can smell water, silt, and that faint sweet scent of blooming papyrus. It's peaceful enough that you might briefly think, okay, maybe I can handle this. That thought lasts about 4 seconds. A fisherman trudges past you, balancing a net over one shoulder, and gives you a look that says, "Why are you standing here like you've never seen a sunrise before?" You want to tell him you usually experience the start of your day through a phone alarm and the comforting lie of a snooze button, but that concept would probably break his brain. Ancient Egyptians didn't snooze, they rose with the light whether they liked it or not. That's your first mainstream fact of the day. Daily life was synchronized with the sun because artificial lighting was limited, costly, and frankly terrible. You inhale and immediately choke on a mouthful of morning gnats who make it their mission to greet every warm-blooded creature on the riverbank. You swat them away with the grace of someone trying to look composed while mildly panicking, which earns you a second look from the fisherman. You pretend you totally meant to do that. Perfectly normal, perfectly fine, totally thriving. As you follow a narrow path toward the water, reeds brush against your legs, and you can hear the chitter of small birds hopping along the mud. A soft breeze schemes the surface of the Nile, carrying with it the coolness of the night. That, by the way, is your quirky fact. Despite the stereotype of unending heat, Egypt's desert climate means nights can get surprisingly chilly, especially in winter. You wouldn't think a place famous for scorching sun could also deliver a dawn that makes you wrap your arms around yourself, but here we are. Ancient Egypt is basically the original extreme weather mood swings zone. You crouch near the bank, dipping your fingers into the Nile. The water is shockingly cold, with little fish flickering beneath your reflection. Somewhere upriver, a papyrus boat creaks as it glides by, its oars cutting the surface in steady, practiced sweeps. Your ears fill with layered sounds, rushing water, distant voices, the rhythmic thud of something being pounded into shape. A drummer? A baker? Honestly, could be either, and the first faint clatter of a marketplace waking up. Just as you start appreciating this cinematic moment, you spot the thing that instantly reminds you why you're not built for this place. A small Nile crocodile sunning itself on a patch of mud across the water. Tiny but with an attitude. It blinks at you like it's drafting a petition for you to leave its territory. And yes, you remind yourself of that charming historical tidbit you definitely wish were not true. Crocodiles were common enough to influence local gods. Sobek, the crocodile deity, symbolized fertility and military strength. You stare at the reptile and think, yes, fertility and military strength are definitely the vibes I'm getting. Historians still argue whether crocodiles were more feared or revered, but you decide not to contribute to the debate by becoming breakfast. You back up a respectful distance, which is more like an overly cautious shuffle that totally gives away your city person fear response. You straighten your back, trying to look unbothered. A passing woman balancing a water jar on her head gives you a sympathetic half-smile, the universal expression for tourist energy. Her jar glints with wet clay, and she walks with a confidence that comes from a lifetime spent navigating uneven ground and unpredictable wildlife. You follow her with your eyes, hoping she didn't notice your attempt to communicate with the crocodile using awkward eye contact and regret. The sun climbs higher, turning the sandy path a soft buttery orange. People around you begin their morning routines. Someone lights a tiny fire, someone else ties a donkey to a wooden post. A child runs by holding something that might be bread or might be a rock. You honestly can't tell at this distance. You hear laughter from a boat crew hauling baskets of fish, the sound bright and cheerful enough to almost make you forget that you're already sweating lightly and it's not even breakfast time. As you walk back toward your home, a group of workers passes, carrying tools for the day's labor. They nod at you politely. You nod back in that, yes, hello fellow hard-working citizens, I too am extremely prepared for this, manner, even though you have the physical stamina of someone who considers going up 2 flights of stairs an accomplishment. A stray cat darts across your path, pausing just long enough to give you a judging look before disappearing into a courtyard. Cats, you remember, were adored here, not just for being adorable fluff balls but because they protected grain stores from mice and snakes. You mentally file that away as another fact to keep you anchored. Also, you silently hope this particular cat likes you. It did not look like it liked you. You breathe in again, warm air now tinged with dust, and feel the weight of the day settling onto your shoulders. Ancient Egypt in the early morning is beautiful, yes, but it's also already asking things of you. Endurance, resilience, situational awareness around reptiles. And this is the easy part of the day. The sun edges up, the heat builds, and you realize the real challenge hasn't even started yet. You don't even make it 5 steps past your doorway before the sun reminds you, firmly, aggressively, almost personally, that it has absolutely no intention of being your friend today. The gentle golden glow from earlier has hardened into something more like molten judgment, and it lands on your shoulders with the weight of a very warm, very irritated cat. You squint up at the sky, and the sky squints back, brighter and hotter and with way more confidence. The heat in ancient Egypt doesn't arrive, like in modern places. It ambushes. One minute you're admiring the soft orange halo over the river. The next, it feels like someone lowered a heat lamp over your entire existence. You try to be cool about it, though cool is already off the menu, but your posture folds just a little, your shoulders sag, and you mutter something that translates universally to nope. The first waves of warmth roll over you, thick and almost physical, the way oven air hits you when you open it to check on cookies. Except here there are no cookies, just the beginning of your slow, simmering defeat. A farmer walks past, barely glistening, carrying a basket like the temperature is nothing but an interesting footnote. You briefly consider that maybe you're just weak, but then, mainstream fact time, ancient Egyptians structured their entire architecture around battling this sun. Thick mud brick walls, high ceilings, narrow windows, and shaded courtyards weren't aesthetic choices. They were survival engineering. You, meanwhile, are seriously questioning your relationship with your own sweat glands, which have decided to activate early and with enthusiasm. As you step toward the main path, you notice how quickly everything is warming. The clay jars outside neighboring houses glow softly in the light. The sand seems to vibrate with reflected heat. Even the donkeys look annoyed, flicking their ears like they're filing complaints. One brays loudly at the sky as if daring it to get hotter. You silently root for the donkey. You pull the edge of your linen wrap closer, trying to cover your neck. Linen is breathable, everyone says that. It's light, airy, and perfect for the desert climate. Except you're already discovering the catch. Linen is breathable in the same way opening a window during a heat wave is fresh air. It's technically true, but the effect is optimistic. A bead of sweat slides down your back and you jump slightly because it feels like a tiny insect. You swat at it, realize it was just you, and immediately pretend nothing happened. That's joke number 1, sweat paranoia, the Egyptian morning game no one wants to play. As you trudge forward, you pass a pair of workers heading toward a field. Their skin is already tanned to the color of baked clay, and they move with the resigned energy of people who have accepted the sun as part of the job description. One of them lifts a hand toward you, offering a sympathetic wave that absolutely reads as, "Shade is your friend, cling to it like your life depends on it." And honestly it does. You drift into a sliver of shadow cast by a building, and the relief washes over you so instantly you almost moan. It's like walking into air that isn't actively trying to sauté you. And here comes your quirky tidbit. Ancient Egyptians believed that intense sunlight could actually unbalance the body's inner harmony, so shade wasn't just comfort, it was spiritual self-preservation. They even used cosmetics like black coal not only for aesthetic reasons but also to reduce glare, which frankly is genius. You suddenly feel deep regret that you do not currently have coal. or sunglasses, or SPF 50, or any SPF at all. Historians still argue whether daily life involved planned breaks specifically to avoid the worst midday heat, or whether people just powered through and accepted mild heat exhaustion as part of the routine. Based on your current mental state, you would personally like to vote for planned breaks, though your opinion is not historically relevant. You are, however, increasingly relevant to the definition of dramatic sweating. Bit by bit, the heat intensifies, and the sun climbs with unsettling confidence. You swear you can feel your eyelashes warming. The air clings to you heavy and dry, yet somehow still sticky. Your breath comes hotter, your mouth feels dusty. When you speak, a simple, bewildered, "Is it normally like this?" directed at no one, the air feels thick in your throat. You pass a baker's workshop, and instantly retreat from the doorway because the wave of oven heat inside punches you square in the lungs. The baker inside is completely unfazed, sliding dough into the large clay oven like this is just a cute room temperature afternoon. You marvel at him. You envy him. You also desperately want a loaf of that warm bread, until you remember how hot it is and how even thinking about swallowing warm food right now makes your eyebrows sweat. Speaking of which, you didn't even know eyebrows could sweat. That's joke number 2, discovering new sweat zones, your body's surprise minigame. Children run barefoot down the street, kicking up dust that sticks to their legs. You look down at your own feet and immediately regret not wiping them earlier. The sand clings instantly, forming what can only be described as granular foot seasoning. You shake your leg, accomplishing absolutely nothing. A woman nearby laughs softly, not mockingly but in the way one laughs at a puppy falling off a cushion. You are the puppy in this scenario. A merchant sweeps the front of his stall, then stops, leans on his broom and watches you bake with gentle curiosity. He gestures toward the shade under his awning, and you accept it with the gratitude of someone being offered CPR. You stand beneath the woven mat, and it's like the world suddenly makes sense again. The air feels breathable, the sun's sting is reduced to a manageable annoyance. You thank him, and though your words are simple, your tone conveys, "Sir, you have saved a life today." He nods modestly. Here, in the sliver of shade, the world calms. You observe how others navigate the heat without complaint. Slow movements, deliberate gestures, pauses that aren't laziness but strategy. This isn't a place where you rush. This is a place where you learn to move like the land, steady, economical, patient. You try to mimic it, adjusting your posture, letting your shoulders relax, slowing your breath. Then you step back into the sun and immediately forget all of that. The difference is brutal. Light slams into you like a hot curtain. You stumble, flinching at the sudden intensity, earning another amused smile from a passerby. The sun is not just overhead. It's everywhere, reflecting off pale walls, shimmering off sand, radiating from the ground itself. You find yourself ducking into every tiny pool of shade, however brief, like a character in a stealth game hiding from a heat-seeking spotlight. That's joke number 3 and also your current survival strategy. By the time you reach the edge of the fields, your patience has melted into a puddle somewhere back on the road. The sun has done what it always does. It tests endurance, exposes weakness, and reshapes your expectations of what hot means. And you now fully understand why ancient Egyptians worshipped the sun but also learned to dodge it. The day is only beginning and already the sun has chewed through half your stamina. You feel it in your skin, in your throat, in the slow drag of your steps. And yet, as daunting as the heat is, the world around you keeps moving, steady, relentless, familiar with its furnace-like rhythm. You're not ready. Not even close. But this day has no intention of slowing down for you. You finally reach the modest courtyard where breakfast is waiting, or more accurately lurking. The morning heat has already softened your bones, and your stomach feels like it's negotiating terms after losing a silent argument with the sun. But here in ancient Egypt, you don't get the luxury of waiting for your appetite to return. Breakfast is fuel, survival, and daily ritual all stacked together, and everyone around you moves with the assumption that you, a functioning human being, will eat. Bold assumption. A neighbor waves you over with a piece of flatbread so dense it could be classified as a weapon in at least 17 modern countries. You take it politely, trying not to show how much wrist strength it requires to hold. The loaf is coarse, heavy, and studded with enough stray grit to remind you that the ancient grain grinding process wasn't exactly precision engineering. Sand gets everywhere here, even in food. Especially in food. You take a tiny bite and your teeth make a faint crunching sound that feels like betrayal. The neighbor nods approvingly, unaware you're one jaw click away from tears. And here comes your mainstream fact. Ancient Egyptian bread, made mostly from emmer wheat, was the absolute cornerstone of their diet, eaten with nearly every meal. It kept people alive. It also, over time, wore down people's teeth thanks to the ever-present sand and tiny stone fragments from grinding tools. You swallow carefully, hoping your dentist never hears about this. Then comes the beer. A clay cup is pressed into your hands with the casual generosity of someone saying, "Here, this will make the day easier." You peer into the cup. The beer is thick, cloudy, and the same color as a confused puddle. Bubbles rise slowly, as though even they aren't totally committed to the idea. You tilt it, sniff it, and realize immediately that this is not the crisp, cold, bubbly modern drink you know. This is liquid bread. Dense, yeasty, warm because refrigeration hasn't been invented and the sun doesn't negotiate. You take a cautious sip, and the texture surprises you. It's almost chewy with suspended bits of grain that your modern brain insists should not be in a beverage. But hey, quirky fact time. Ancient Egyptian beer was intentionally chunky, fermented from partially baked bread loaves and often used as both a drink and a calorie supplement. Imagine a smoothie but grainier, warmer, and also slightly judgmental. You lower the cup slowly, committing to a swallow only after your survival instincts confirm that yes, people here drink this daily and live. A woman from next door laughs gently when she sees your expression and pats your shoulder like you're a child trying broccoli for the first time. You want to explain that where you come from, beer, doesn't require chewing, but words fail you, mostly because your tongue is still processing what you just experienced. Someone offers you a bowl of onions next, raw, freshly pulled from a basket. Onion breath must be a communal experience here because everyone crunches happily, chatting through the sharp scent that now fills your nostrils like a challenge. You take one. You respect the tradition. You bite. The flavor detonates across your tongue, clearing your sinuses so thoroughly you momentarily see into the future. You fan your mouth lightly while maintaining your dignity. Sort of. A child runs past carrying a small jar of honey, and for a split second, you dare to hope. The child pauses, eyes bright with the smug joy of someone holding the only sweet thing in a 3-house radius. You politely, desperately, gesture toward the jar. The child grins wider and takes off running. Honestly fair. You turn back toward the meal spread before you. Bread solid enough to stun a burglar, beer thick enough to spread on toast, onions sharp enough to clean barnacles off a boat. Your stomach gurgles, unsure whether to prepare for digestion or combat. You glance at the family around you, people who have eaten like this every day of their lives, and their ease makes you admire them. They talk, laugh, break bread together, drink beer with the same casual grace you reserve for morning coffee. Someone nearby crushes herbs in a small mortar, releasing a grassy fragrance that briefly masks the onion cloud. The motions are rhythmic, practiced, almost meditative. They make breakfast look pleasant. Historians still argue whether the average Egyptian diet was healthier or harsher than we often imagine. Some point to the nutrient-rich staples like fish, vegetables, grains, and beer. Others emphasize the dental wear, the monotony, and occasional food shortages. You personally cast a vote for harsh, though again your opinion is deeply compromised by the sand currently crunching between your molars. You try another bite of bread, chewing cautiously. Once you accept the texture, and the ever-present grit, it's actually not bad. The warm, earthy taste feels grounding, like it belongs to this land in a way that makes sense. You dip it into a small dish of mashed fava beans, which improves it dramatically. Someone sees you do this and smiles with approval. Congratulations, you have unlocked breakfast technique level 1. The beer, on the other hand, remains a challenge. You take another sip, and the warmth hits your tongue like a baked loaf pretending to be a beverage. You swallow anyway. Hydration is hydration even when it's chewy. A cat, possibly the same judgmental one from earlier, slips into the courtyard, weaving between legs with the confidence of a creature who knows it is adored. It eyes your bread and sits down expectantly. You tear off a piece and offer it. The cat sniffs, flicks an ear, and walks away with the attitude of someone declining an invitation beneath their social ranking. Your first attempt at cross-species you'd think getting dressed would be the easiest part of your day, or at least the least dramatic. But ancient Egypt has other plans, beginning with the fact that your linen outfit has the personality of a stubborn toddler and the texture of overachieving sandpaper. It's supposed to be breathable, cool, and comfortable. Everyone says that. Everyone lies. You lift the tunic and shake it out, and a tiny dust cloud rises like a genie whose only wish is to make you sneeze. The linen is light, yes, but also stiff in places and soft in others, as if it hasn't decided what kind of fabric it wants to be. You slip it over your head, and the fabric drags across your sun-warmed skin with the enthusiasm of a cat rubbing against furniture. Affectionate but also itchy. Immediately itchy. The armholes feel fine at first, but within seconds they turn prickly along the seams. It's the sweat, already gathering from your morning battle with the sun. Linen plus sweat equals a sticky, clingy, mildly abrasive experience. You shift, tug, adjust, and repeat, hoping no one nearby sees you doing a full body shuffle like you're trying to shake off imaginary bees. Then you learn your first important lesson. Ancient Egypt is a world built from sand. Not near sand, not adjacent to sand. Built from it. And sand here has a sense of humor. It hides in folds, rides breezes, waits patiently in hems, and the moment you put on fresh clothes, it whispers, surprise. A pinch of it falls down your collar. You shiver. Another handful drifts into your sandals. You sigh. A final sprinkle works its way into your underlayer, and you start bargaining with invisible forces. Mainstream historical fact time. Egyptians were meticulous about cleanliness. They bathed daily, sometimes twice, used scented oils, shaved heads to reduce lice, and wore clean linen as a social expectation. Meanwhile, you've been dressed for 90 seconds and already look like you've fought a losing battle with a dust devil. You pat the fabric down, trying to smooth out the creases. The linen warms quickly under the rising sun, radiating heat back at you like a reluctant space heater. You tug the neckline away from your chest to let air flow through. It immediately sticks back. You repeat this dance at least 5 times before accepting the fabric has opinions and none of them align with yours. You wrap a belt around your waist. Simple rope, nothing fancy, and discover instantly that belts in this climate are more decorative than functional. Your tunic poofs in unpredictable ways, puffing out on one side, folding sharply on the other, creating the general silhouette of a poorly carved clay figure. A woman passing by glances at you with amused sympathy and helps tug one side of the fabric into place. It stays there for a grand total of 3 seconds before drifting rebelliously out of alignment again. Now comes the sandals. You slide your feet into the woven straps, grateful for the momentary relief from walking barefoot on warm ground. That gratitude lasts about 7 steps. Sand creeps in under the heel. You try shaking it out. The sand returns instantly because the universe here has no mercy. Another few steps and your toes feel exfoliated against your will. You consider removing the sandals altogether, but then you remember the rocks, the buried shells, and the fact that scorpions exist. You keep the sandals. Quirky tidbit time. Some Egyptians sprinkled powdered natron on their skin and clothing to reduce sweat and odor. You don't have any natron. What you do have is sweat and plenty of it. Your linen clings like a needy acquaintance who refuses to understand personal space. As you step out into the street, the wind picks up, gently at first, then with a sharp gust that flaps your tunic dramatically. For one brief, glorious moment, you feel cool air against your skin. Then the wind dies down, and you realize it has deposited yet another layer of sand into your clothing. You tap your chest, hear the subtle shff sound of grains shifting inside the fabric and sigh deeply. Historians still argue whether most Egyptians embraced this sandy reality as part of life or whether constant cleaning and shaking out clothes was a quiet, daily annoyance. Based on your current mood, you are firmly on team annoyance. You spot a group of laborers ahead, adjusting their kilts with practiced motions. Their movements look effortless, efficient. No tugging, no grimacing, no full-body micro-adjustments. You try to mimic their confidence, pulling your tunic straight with one smooth gesture. The fabric resists, bunching awkwardly at your side. You attempt a second adjustment, but this one sends a tiny cascade of sand down your leg, and you let out a sound that lands somewhere between a sigh and a defeated whine. Joke number 1 arrives when you catch yourself slapping your own shoulder to dislodge an itch, only to discover it wasn't a bug at all. It was just the linen seam rubbing you the wrong way. You repeat the slap a few minutes later in a different spot, earning a curious side eye from a goat tied near a doorway. Sweat gathers again at the small of your back and the linen sticks, then peels, then sticks again. Your shoulders itch. Your waist itches. A particularly bold grain of sand scratches behind your knee like it's trying to write its name. Joke number 2 surfaces when you consider, just for a moment, walking straight into the Nile to rinse off clothes and all. You imagine it. You floating like a soggy linen dumpling. You dismiss the idea quickly, remembering Section 12 is waiting to remind you why casual river dips are a terrible plan. Another breeze drifts by, lifting the hem of your tunic just enough for sand to swoop in dramatically like it's entering a stage performance. You slap the hem lightly, attempting to intimidate the sand. The sand remains unbothered. Of course it does. A scribe passes, perfectly crisp in his well-kept linen, untouched by sweat or grit. He looks immaculate, like someone who has never known itchiness in his life. You try not to resent him. You fail a little. By this point, you've accepted that your clothes are not merely clothes, they're a full-body endurance challenge. Movement becomes strategy. Every extra step risks new friction. Every gust of wind is both relief and threat. The sun bakes the fabric, the sand infiltrates it, you adjust, squirm, breathe, and repeat. Joke number 3 arrives when you realize that your tunic has twisted completely around without your noticing, leaving the side seam almost in the front. You stare at it. The tunic stares back. You don't even make it past sunrise before someone hands you a tool you've never seen in your life and absolutely shouldn't be trusted with. Your fingers close around a wooden hoe, heavy, splintery, suspiciously damp, and you realize your soft modern hands have already entered their villain origin story phase. You plant your feet in the dirt, try to copy what the people around you are doing, and immediately learn that farming in ancient Egypt isn't a quaint pastoral hobby. It's cardio mixed with a punishment for crimes you didn't commit. The ground is stubborn. The sun isn't even high yet, but it already feels like it's personally disappointed in your work ethic. You jab at the soil, which reacts like it has a grudge. Even the cows pulling the plow give you a look that reads, amateur. A farmer beside you, shirt open, shoulders carved from a lifetime of not skipping arm day, makes the motion look effortless. You, on the other hand, practically dislocate something trying to mimic the rhythm. Joke number 1 lands naturally when your hoe catches on a clump of earth and slings a pathetic spray of dust directly into your own face, like the Nile Valley itself is trying to humble you. A mainstream historical fact slides in. Most Egyptians, even the ones we love to think of as glamorous tomb builders or scribes, spent their lives farming along the floodplains, working with the annual inundation of the Nile. The flood brings nutrients and responsibilities. You're learning that fertile land actually means a lot of mud that refuses to cooperate. Still, you carry on. You try switching tasks, hoping anything, will be easier. Someone hands you a large woven basket and gestures toward a pile of harvested grain. You're supposed to carry it across the field. No problem, you think. You lift it and your spine immediately files a complaint with HR. The basket feels like you're transporting all the carbs you've ever eaten in your life. You shuffle forward, knees wobbling, pretending this is fine, totally fine, you've got this. But halfway across, you're using muscles you haven't used since that one time you tried Pilates and regretted everything. A kid jogs by carrying an identical basket like it's full of feathers. He laughs the way only someone who has farmed his entire life can, kindly but with deep cosmic amusement. You try to laugh back, but it comes out as more of a wheeze. Joke number 2 sneaks in. If this were a modern workout class, they'd call it Egyptian functional fitness, and charge $39 a session. But okay. Maybe farming isn't your calling. Maybe you're destined for a different kind of labor. When someone from the construction crew comes looking for extra hands, you volunteer before your brain can veto the decision. Next thing you know, you're helping haul stone blocks. Not the giant pyramid ones, but the medium-sized everyday city building ones. They still weigh approximately, nope. You and 3 others grip a wooden sledge, lean forward, and pull. The block scrapes over the compact earth, inching forward like it's trying to teach you patience through psychological warfare. A foreman shouts encouragement, though it sounds vaguely like, "Don't die please, we still need you." You dig your heels in and tug. Your hands are already blistering. The rope fibers bite into your palms with the enthusiasm of an overexcited house cat. Here's your quirky tidbit. Egyptians sometimes used a mix of water, mud, and even milk to reduce friction under sledges. Unfortunately for you, today they are using nothing because you are apparently the friction reducer. You manage to haul the block to its designated spot, but the moment you let go of the rope, your arms feel like wet noodles. You rotate your shoulders and something pops, which you hope is normal. Probably not. Historians still argue whether most construction laborers were full-time specialists or ordinary villagers pressed into seasonal work. But you suspect they'd revise their theories quickly if they watched you right now, struggling like someone trying to drag a fridge across a carpeted apartment. Someone hands you a water jug. Blessed relief. You drink too fast, nearly choke, then thank them with the kind of gratitude typically reserved for saving your life. This is the first moment you understand why shade is a privilege, water is a blessing, and hydration breaks are basically ancient Egypt's original spa service. You get a sign next to mortar mixing. Surely this can't be too hard? You're wrong naturally. You begin grinding gypsum with a round stone that looks like it was designed explicitly to ruin forearms. Ancient workers perform the task in smooth, repeated circles, barely breaking a sweat. You, however, sound like a malfunctioning windmill. And the gypsum dust sticks to your already sun-damp skin, forming a chalky layer that makes you feel like you're slowly turning into a statue someone will one day discover and immediately identify as the least prepared worker in ancient history. Joke number 3 arrives when you sneeze into the powder, creating a chalk explosion impressive enough that someone pauses work just to watch the little cloud drift by. You glance around and realize 2 things. First, everyone else here has calluses thick enough to qualify as armor. Second, your soft modern hands are not. A deep sting shoots across your palm, your first blister tearing. You wince but keep going, partly out of pride, partly because stopping seems like it might offend the gods. And honestly, after everything you've seen today, you're not entirely convinced the gods don't personally supervise workplace morale. As the hours drag on, you begin noticing details you ignored before. The rhythm of labor isn't just work, it's culture. People sing, shout jokes, share quick snacks, and trade gossip about land, harvests, and the latest temple renovations. Kids scamper between adults. Someone's grandmother arrives with a pot of beer, milky, warm, frothy, exactly the kind they brewed daily. You sip some and immediately understand why. It's calories, hydration, and courage in a cup. A mainstream fact whispers through this moment. Beer was a staple of daily life, consumed by almost everyone from laborers to nobles. It wasn't a luxury, it was fuel. Eventually, predictably, you hit the point where your hands just stop cooperating. They ache, throb, and buzz like they're trying to stage a rebellion. Someone wraps a strip of linen around your palm. It helps barely. But with that quick gesture, practical, efficient, indifferent to your suffering, you feel yourself slipping into the rhythm of the day. Not gracefully, not skillfully, but honestly. The sun climbs. Then finally, mercifully, it begins to fall. The workday winds down. People pack their tools, roll their shoulders, splash water on their faces. You do the same, though your splash is more like a desperate attempt to revive your soul. And here's the most surprising part. Despite your exhaustion, there's something satisfying about it. Your body aches, but in a way that feels earned. You've survived your first day at jobs nobody warned you about. Farming, hauling stone, mixing mortar. And while your hands are ruined, your sense of accomplishment is fully intact. You look at your bandaged palm, flex your fingers slowly, and think, tomorrow somehow you'll do it again. You wander away from the work site with your arms still buzzing from hauling baskets, thinking you might get a moment to breathe, but no, your day decides to pivot straight into the one danger even sunstroke fears: paperwork. Or, well, the ancient Egyptian version of it, which feels somehow worse because it involves dust, ink that stains everything it touches, and men who can skewer your self-esteem with a single flick of a reed pen. You drift toward a shaded portico where a few scribes sit cross-legged, looking like they've achieved a higher, papyrus-based enlightenment. Their posture alone says, we do not sweat. We do not toil. We judge. And the moment they spot you, they straighten with the synchronized serenity of cats deciding whether you're worth acknowledging. You hover awkwardly because that's your specialty here, hovering and hoping no one hands you something sharp or heavy. But instead, a scribe gestures at you with a tiny roll of papyrus, a motion so elegant it should come with its own soundtrack. You sit and instantly realize the ground is somehow hotter here than anywhere else. Of course it is. Bureaucracy generates its own heat. The scribe nearest you begins to explain in slow, measured tones that every grain you helped harvest must be recorded. And we're not talking write down a number. We're talking capture the full soul of the grain with the precision of a poet. You blink, already overwhelmed. One mainstream fact gently taps you on the shoulder. Scribes in ancient Egypt really were some of the most educated and influential people around, managing everything from taxes to temple supplies. The entire civilization practically balanced on their meticulous handwriting. Your modern handwriting, meanwhile, Looks like the panicked scrawl of someone trying to sign a receipt while being chased by a goose. They hand you a reed pen, which has the personality of a splinter with ambition. You hold it like it's about to attack. The scribe dips his own pen in a shallow palette of black and red ink, the two main colors used for writing, and demonstrates a neat, fluid line. When you try, your hand twitches, and the line looks like the Nile having an identity crisis. The scribe nods in that polite way teachers do right before saying, "Maybe we'll try something simpler." You're given the task of tallying baskets of grain, which sounds manageable until the scribe mentions, very casually, that an incorrect entry could lead to someone not receiving the food they're owed. You freeze. So much responsibility. And here you were, feeling proud of yourself for not tripping on a loose stone earlier. As you try to focus, a quirky detail pops up. One of the scribes has a protective amulet shaped like a tiny baboon dangling from his belt. Not a cat, not an ibis. A baboon because Thoth, the god of writing, could appear as one. The amulet's expression is judging you harder than the humans are, which feels unfair but accurate. You try again with the pen, but your hand cramps almost immediately. Your fingers are used to typing, not pinching a brittle stick that fights back every time it touches the papyrus. You shake your hand gently, pretending it's just a stretch, but the scribes absolutely notice. One even raises an eyebrow so sharp it could cut stone. You wonder if ancient eyebrows evolved this way purely to intimidate tax evaders. While the scribes discuss grain quotas, you find yourself drifting into a sleepy haze, partially because their voices form this rhythmic, soothing drone, and partially because bureaucracy is universal in its ability to lull you into passive despair. But then a phrase slips out, something about historians still argue whether certain scribal schools standardize their instruction the same way across gnomes. And boom, you come back to life for a moment, because you sense a scholarly debate has just passed by like a breeze from another dimension. The scribe who mentioned it doesn't elaborate. He just keeps writing as if casually dropping controversies is part of his job description. Someone slides another papyrus sheet toward you, and you awkwardly align your knees, which keep trying to fold in ways human joints are not meant to fold. The papyrus crackles. The reed pen trembles. Sweat trickles down your back, and you pray none of it drips onto the page because the last thing you need is to accidentally invent watercolor. The scribe murmurs instructions, guiding your hand like you're a child learning to draw your first hieroglyph. You produce a series of marks that technically count as tallying, though the marks lean so hard they look like they're trying to escape the page. He nods again, a faint smile softening his features. Progress. Tiny, unsteady progress, but progress nonetheless. And then, a joke sneaks into your mind. You wonder if ancient Egypt had a version of that one coworker who insists they're quitting to become a writer, only here being a writer actually is a fancy, powerful career. You picture someone dramatically announcing, "I'm leaving the fields to pursue my passion, numbers." You snort softly. The nearest scribe looks at you like your brain might be melting. He's not wrong. As the hours drag on, you notice your legs going numb, your back curling into a question mark, and your hand developing a slow, simmering resentment for all reed-based writing tools. Occasionally, a breeze drifts by carrying familiar scents of sand, sweat, and strangely, something sweet like dates warming in the sun. The moment is almost peaceful, until the baboon amulet bonks lightly against the scribe's belt again, reminding you to look productive. A basket counter approaches, delivering new numbers for the scribes to record, and you marvel, genuinely, at how smoothly the whole system works despite the heat, the dust, and the staggering amount of patience required. The scribe next to you pauses to stretch his fingers, and you note with admiration how dexterous they are. Years of practice sculpting letters have turned his hands into instruments of quiet authority. You meanwhile have ink on your elbow for reasons unknown. Another small joke bubbles up. You imagine pulling out a modern pen, clicking it dramatically, and watching the scribes react with the same shock you'd expect if you suddenly sprouted wings. You suppress the laugh, but it leaks out anyway as a tiny puff. One scribe narrows his eyes just enough to convey, "We take ink seriously here." Time flows like sluggish honey. You manage several lines of acceptable tallies, and though none of them are pretty, none are catastrophically wrong. The scribes seem relieved. Possibly proud. Possibly just glad you didn't cause a grain shortage. By the time they dismiss you, your fingertips are stained black, your legs wobble, and your patience feels as thin as papyrus itself. But you step away with something unexpected. Deep respect for the quiet power of ink in those who wield it. Reed pens might be pointy, sure, but scribes? They're sharper. The temple looms ahead like a monolith, daring you to feel humble, and immediately you realize it's doing its job exceptionally well. Massive sandstone walls rise from the ground, carved with hieroglyphs so intricate you swear they could be secret messages to confuse future time travelers, or at least modern tourists who think Instagram angles matter. You step onto the flagstones and feel the uneven heat radiating through your sandals, a subtle reminder that comfort is not on the agenda today. Every footstep echoes against the columns, a percussion of your own inadequacy. A guard, tall, silent, and very serious, nods at you and you nod back, probably too enthusiastically. Your modern gestures feel clumsy here. The temple is a world apart from your chaotic, sun-baked labor fields. You weren't warned that stepping inside these sacred spaces would come with a manual written in patience, respect, and immediate humility. Even your posture has to be audited. Arms too relaxed, head tilted wrong, eyes too curious. All are offenses punishable by silent judgment. A mainstream historical fact settles over you. Temples in ancient Egypt were centers of both worship and administration, often staffed with priests who meticulously oversaw rituals, offerings, and the recording of sacred knowledge. It's not just a spiritual space, it's a workplace, a law office, and a stage for the gods rolled into one. You trudge further inside, wondering why anyone would design a building that makes a human feel so dramatically small. The interior is cool, almost eerily so, despite the sun outside. Stone walls absorb the heat and release it gradually, and the air smells faintly of incense, sand, and, curiously, papyrus. Quirky tidbit: some priests even wore elaborate headdresses resembling falcons or crocodiles during ceremonies, partly to awe onlookers and partly because fashion has always been a power move. You glance at one and consider that, yes, this is an intimidation tactic that transcends millennia. Columns rise around you, each carved with images of gods who glare down with eternal patience. You attempt to read the hieroglyphs, but your brain insists it's all decorative doodling. You trace a symbol with a fingertip, quickly withdrawing when a priest's sharp gaze makes you feel like you've just confessed to a minor crime. You realize very quickly that mistakes here are embarrassing, not lethal, thankfully, but the social pressure is almost unbearable. Every step is a negotiation between awe, curiosity, and self-preservation. You're guided toward the inner sanctum, where rituals take place and only select priests usually enter. The space is dimly lit by oil lamps, shadows dancing against statues of deities with oversized eyes and serene expressions. You remember the scribe from earlier, whose ink-stained hands wielded invisible authority. Here, the priests wield ritual, incense, and silence with the same effect. Your heart rate picks up slightly, you feel conspicuously clumsy in your simple linen. A priest begins to chant, low and rhythmic, in a language you can't follow. The vibration travels through the temple floor into your feet, up your legs, into your chest. It's hypnotic, a sensory trick that leaves you both captivated and vaguely terrified. Historians still argue whether these chants were primarily spiritual or whether they functioned as acoustic engineering designed to manipulate human emotion. You quietly hope it's the latter, so you can blame your growing sense of panic on physics instead of cosmic judgment. You notice offerings: small bowls of fruit, clay jars filled with oil, and even a tiny figurine that seems to smile at you smugly. One offering, a delicately baked loaf, makes your stomach growl. Your modern self wants to snack immediately. Your ancient self wonders if eating it counts as sacrilege. You choose restraint, partly out of respect, partly because you're still recovering from breakfast and Section 3's culinary horrors. Walking further, you reach a smaller chamber where the ceiling is covered in star motifs painted in vivid blues and gold. It feels like the sky has descended indoors, only it is frozen, eternal, and somehow judging your every misstep. A thought flits through your mind: joke number one. You imagine a modern "Do Not Disturb" God inside sign hanging from the doorway. You chuckle softly, aware that the humor is entirely for your own survival. The priests move around with practiced grace, performing rituals that include waving censers, pouring oils, and speaking incantations that seem to bend the air itself. You attempt to mimic a gesture, and immediately the incense smoke curls unexpectedly, hitting your face. You cough lightly, and one priest raises an eyebrow. Not disapproving, not angry, just measuring. You realize the temple isn't a place where clumsiness can hide, it magnifies it. Quirky tidbit number 2. Some rituals involved priests using a type of mirror made from polished bronze to reflect sunlight onto sacred objects. The effect was dramatic and confusing for outsiders. You imagine trying to explain this to someone in a modern office, and your brain laughs involuntarily. You shuffle to the edge of the room, attempting to blend into the shadows, and notice a small alcove with carvings that seem almost narrative, scenes of gods interacting with humans, some triumphant, some chaotic, some inexplicable. You stare at one depicting a man being judged by Anubis, wondering if it's a warning, a history lesson, or a practical joke from 3,000 years ago. You swallow, remembering that your modern anxiety has nothing on ancient divine judgment, whether literal or symbolic. As you continue observing, your senses begin to stretch. The flicker of lamp flames, the muted scent of incense, the murmuring chants, all layer together into a rhythm your body wants to synchronize with. Yet at the same time, your mind is aware that one wrong movement, one misplaced gesture, could make you feel absurdly out of place in front of people who have dedicated their lives to ritual precision. You shift, trying not to make it obvious that your modern comfort has completely abandoned you. Joke number 2 arrives when you notice a cat, sacred and motionless, sitting atop a ledge like it owns the entire temple. You bow slightly just in case and it stares back, unimpressed. You remember section 3 and the judgmental courtyard cat, thinking this species has maintained its condescending streak for millennia. A priest comes forward, hands folded, and instructs you to light a small oil lamp. Your modern fingers tremble. You dip the wick in the oil, remembering everything you've learned about disasters, blisters, and sand infiltration. Somehow you manage a tiny flame. Flickers, yes, but stays alive. You feel a faint surge of accomplishment. The priest nods, a small gesture that communicates approval, not relief, but enough to steady your nerves. And yet, despite this small victory, you're acutely aware that temples operate on an entirely different axis of rules, reverence, and expectations. Mainstream fact check. These spaces weren't just symbolic. They were actively integrated into daily governance, taxation, and societal order. Every ritual had purpose. Every chant had consequence. Every gesture mattered. You, a modern interloper, are entirely unsuited to this world without at least a decade of study. Historians still argue whether temple rituals primarily serve the gods or society itself, but as you glance at the grandeur surrounding you, the soaring columns, golden paint flecks, meticulously carved reliefs, you feel certain of one thing: humility is mandatory, comprehension optional. You step slowly toward the exit, trying not to stumble, careful to respect invisible boundaries. You glance back once, noting how the fading incense smoke lingers like a memory of discipline and awe. You understand, in a profound way, that these temples weren't just buildings, they were experiences designed to dwarf the ego, sharpen the mind, and remind humans of their place in a world ruled by both the tangible and the divine. And as you walk back into the sunlight, blinking against the bright day, you realize that surviving a temple visit requires more than physical endurance. It demands attentiveness, respect, and a willingness to You wake with a mild headache and a subtle reminder that lifting stone and tallying grains yesterday may have permanent consequences for your posture. Hoping for a brief reprieve, you stumble toward the local healer's hut, naive enough to imagine a simple poultice or soothing drink. Instead, you're greeted by an assortment of jars, powders, and very serious faces that seem to evaluate your very soul rather than your minor aches. The air smells like a mix of herbs, fermented honey, and something that might be, well, you hope it isn't what it seems. A healer waves you to a woven mat and gestures for you to sit. You comply, instantly regretting it. The floor is harder than any modern yoga block, and your muscles are still screaming from yesterday's jobs nobody warned you about. You watch as they select several mysterious ingredients, grinding, mixing, and muttering incantations. You try to process this logically, but your modern brain keeps pinging with alarm. I did not sign up for this. I did not consent to whatever this is. Joke number 1 surfaces naturally. You imagine a Yelp review in 3000 BC. 5 stars if you like herbal paste that smells vaguely like a swamp, 2 stars if you prefer your pain relief without existential dread. You stifle a laugh as a bowl is brought closer, steam rising in an aromatic swirl that's simultaneously soothing and vaguely threatening. A mainstream historical fact slaps you in the face. Ancient Egyptian medicine was surprisingly sophisticated for its time. Healers used a combination of natural remedies, spells, and practical procedures to treat ailments ranging from simple headaches to more serious injuries. You suddenly appreciate the careful blend of ritual and biology, even if the ritual part makes your stomach quiver. One healer dips a reed brush into a dark, viscous substance, some sort of oil or resin, and gestures for you to let it touch the area behind your ear. You hesitate. What follows is a procedure that feels like an elaborate art project designed by someone who hates you just a little. Fringe tidbit: some remedies included crocodile dung, fermented milk, or even animal fats, ingredients that modern sensibilities classify as biohazard adjacent. You remind yourself that the ancient world had different definitions of hygiene and healing, though you're not sure if your body is ready to adapt that quickly. You try to ask a question, like whether there's an alternative, but your voice comes out slightly panicked, and the healer responds with a calm gesture that translates roughly as, "Trust us." Or at least don't interfere. You swallow, realizing that your modern ideas of informed consent are, well, let's call them outdated. The healer applies a paste along your temples, its texture gritty and oily at the same time, and whispers a chant. You inhale sharply, the scent reminding you vaguely of damp reeds and the riverbank. A small, almost imperceptible smile crosses your face at the absurdity. You, a modern human with hand sanitizer and Advil, being treated with sticky pastes and chants. You can almost hear your body muttering, "Really? This is happening?" Historians still argue whether certain remedies were primarily psychological, ritual acting as placebo, or genuinely medicinal. You decide it's probably both, though your nerves teeter between fascination and horror. Your body relaxes slightly as the healer moves on to a second concoction, this one intended for digestion. You recall Section 3, the wrestling match with ancient bread and beer, and realize your stomach is now officially being re-educated in unfamiliar chemistry. Joke number 2 surfaces. You think, somewhere in a parallel universe, my future self is writing a blog titled, 10 Ways Ancient Egypt Will Absolutely Confuse Your Modern Stomach. You snicker quietly, careful not to offend anyone by appearing too irreverent. The healer's assistant hands you a small cup filled with a dark, murky liquid. You eye it like a participant in a dubious science experiment. One sip later, and your taste buds stage a protest. Bitter, earthy, vaguely metallic, and somehow simultaneously sweet. Your body processes it in slow motion, your mind narrating every chemical rebellion like a documentary voiceover. Despite your misgivings, you begin to feel a curious warmth spreading through your chest. Not immediate relief, mind you, but enough for your modern brain to grudgingly acknowledge. Maybe they know what they're doing. That feeling is interrupted by the healer moving on to apply bandages infused with aromatic oils. Your wrists and ankles, sore from yesterday's work, are treated with meticulous care, yet you can't shake the faint panic over what might be in the mixture. You glance around and notice shelves lined with tiny figurines, some of them oddly whimsical: cats, monkeys, even miniature crocodiles. Quirky tidbit: some Egyptians believed small statues or amulets could channel healing energy or distract malevolent spirits, essentially acting as ancient talismans. You make a mental note that this system is impressively holistic, blending body, mind, and superstition into one complex package. Time stretches. The paste hardens slightly, incense smoke drifts lazily, and your body starts responding in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. A tension easing here, a pulse slowing there. You recognize that despite your modern anxiety, your muscles actually appreciate the ministrations. You allow yourself a tiny sigh, careful to keep it small, respectful. The healer observes with unflappable patience, as if noticing relief is part of their sacred duty. Another intriguing observation: some remedies were tailored based on astrological timing, body type, or even dreams. You think back to Section 7, where temple rituals bent your perception of reality, and realize the overlap between spiritual and medical practice is no accident. The healer might be using practical chemistry, intuition, ritual, and yes, a little guesswork that somehow works. Historians still argue whether these methods were systematically taught or passed down haphazardly through apprenticeships. But watching your own body respond to a paste you wouldn't touch at home, you wonder if documentation really matters that much. By the time the treatment session ends, your modern muscles are softening, your head aches dull, and your stomach feels less like a battleground. You stand, feeling an odd combination of relief. You step through the threshold of a modest mud brick home, and immediately your modern comfort fantasies deflate like a popped balloon. The walls are warm to the touch, sticky with dust and a faint trace of yesterday's cooking, and the air is a thick tapestry of smoke, sweat, and something faintly fermented. You inhale cautiously, wondering if you've just crossed into a live-action, good luck surviving domestic life simulation. Joke number 1 pops into your head. Home sweet home, they said. It'll be cozy, they said. You glance around and realize that the cozy part of ancient Egypt involves far more chores than you anticipated. A mainstream historical fact nudges your awareness. Most households relied on constant labor to function. Grinding grain, fetching water, washing clothes, maintaining simple but demanding hearths. You spot a woman bent over a grinding stone, her rhythm hypnotic, her back a reminder of your own Section 5 struggles. You trudge toward the corner of the room, trying to find a spot that doesn't immediately demand labor or attention, and fail spectacularly. Quirky detail. Some families use small ceramic figurines as household assistants, believing these little statues could ward off pests or attract fertility. You quietly consider negotiating with a tiny clay cat to take over some of your chores, but it stares back blankly. You sigh, recognizing that clay does not, in fact, participate in labor-saving measures. The kitchen is a smoky, chaotic ballet. Earthen jars sit beside open hearths where flatbreads puff and sizzle. Oil drips onto the floor, mingling with sand and stray grains, creating a texture that's simultaneously slick and abrasive. A neighbor leans over your shoulder, inspecting your progress on cleaning a small linen garment. Their expression is polite but intrusive, and you instantly feel judged. You try to shrug, but the linen slips, your fingers sticky with flour, and the observer raises one skeptical eyebrow. Historians still argue whether communal kitchen labor was primarily a social obligation or a strict survival requirement. You're inclined to vote for survival. Every step in this home demands attention. Sweeping dust, tending the fire, stirring the stew. You notice a small child weaving between legs, laughing, a whirlwind of energy that you do not have. You step aside cautiously, almost toppling a pot, and swear the smoke is judging your coordination. Your own stomach reminds you of Section 8's herbal horrors. The cook waves a ladle, suggesting you taste a small broth. You hesitate, worried about ingestion versus reverence. The taste is earthy, aromatic, and slightly bitter. Your brain's warning system goes off, but your taste buds detect a faint promise of comfort. You nod politely, and the cook smiles, apparently satisfied that you did not spit it out in a panic. You're handed a cloth to help with washing dishes, and the sponge is actually a piece of porous reed. The friction scrapes your modern skin, your fingers already tender from yesterday's labor. As you scrub, a mosquito buzzes near your ear, and you notice a small lizard darting across the wall. Quirky tidbit. Egyptians sometimes kept geckos indoors to control insects, a natural pest management system that doubles as a mild paranoia trigger. You watch it, momentarily entranced, realizing that even the smallest creature holds a subtle authority over your movements. Joke number 2 surfaces. I didn't sign up for the great indoor obstacle course, yet here I am. Every step is choreographed, though you are failing spectacularly. The neighbor leans in again, this time whispering instructions, possibly constructive, possibly judgmental. You nod, half understanding, half panicked. Your modern brain imagines a reality show, who can survive household life in 1500 BCE? And you are absolutely losing. Laundry is next. A slow, painstaking ritual involving water drawn from the Nile, soap-like mixtures made of natron, and repeated kneading and rinsing. Your hands ache, fingers pruny, and you notice a faint aroma of alkaline mineral hanging in the air. You recall Section 3 where digestion already challenged your body, and you realize that survival is not about any one task. It's the relentless accumulation of minor discomforts. Historians still argue whether domestic roles were rigidly gendered or somewhat fluid depending on wealth and location. From your modern perspective, the question seems moot. You are still learning how to keep the smoke out of your eyes while avoiding ceramic jars, lizards, and judgmental neighbors. You trudge outside to fetch water in a clay jug. The Nile stretches lazily before you, a comforting sight until you lift the jug and realize your arms are still trembling from prior labor. The neighbor watches approvingly, or so you assume, while a chicken weaves near your feet, clucking indignantly as you step too close. Fringe tidbit. Egyptians sometimes rubbed birds with oils or dust to keep them docile, which is simultaneously fascinating and horrifying to your modern sensibilities. Returning, you balance the jug carefully, aware that spilling water means extra labor. Inside, the smoke has thickened, the bread is browning rapidly, and the child has toppled a small pile of woven baskets. You sigh, internally acknowledging that modern life offers conveniences like running water, insulated kitchens and childcare apps. Joke number 3 sneaks in. Who knew Home Sweet Home required the dexterity of a juggler and the patience of a saint? By the time evening approaches, your body aches in new ways, your hands smell faintly of ash, clay and grain dust, and your stomach contemplates rebellion again. Yet a strange satisfaction settles over you. The chores, though relentless, are grounding. You survived cooking, cleaning, nosy neighbors and tiny animals with disproportionate authority. You step back, noting the rhythm of the household, the hum of domestic labor that keeps the ancient world moving. As night falls, the firelight flickers across mud brick walls, shadows dancing like silent spectators. You sit on the floor, exhausted, and realize that rest in this home is both a gift and a challenge. You may lie down, but sleep will be punctuated by distant clucks, cracking fires, and faint arguments about water distribution. The modern comforts of mattress and climate control are luxuries your body now craves. And yet, despite the chaos, the smoke, and the constant low-grade stress, you survived another day inside the heartbeat of ancient life. Daily chores are no joke. They build endurance, patience, and a vivid appreciation for things as simple as breathing in fresh, non-smoky air. Your muscles, though sore, feel attuned to the rhythm of the home, and for a fleeting moment, you understand how households functioned as microcosms of the larger society. Busy, interconnected, occasionally terrifying, and always demanding vigilance. You step outside into the courtyard, squinting against the fierce sunlight, and immediately realize that in ancient Egypt, there is no neutral ground. Every surface, every object, every shadow could be a message from a god, or a warning you are too inexperienced to interpret. Joke number 1 bubbles up. So much for casually walking to the market like a normal human. Your sandals crunch against sand-strewn stone as you weave between pottery jars, piles of grain, and small shrines tucked into corners. You feel the weight of divine observation pressing on your shoulders, a subtle hum of potential judgment in every glance. A mainstream historical fact floats into your mind, almost like a lifeline. Egyptians incorporated religion into nearly all aspects of daily life. Gods were invoked not only in temples but also at meals, during childbirth, on journeys, and even at the simplest chores. You glance at a tiny shrine to Bes, protector of households and childbirth, tucked awkwardly between storage jars. You bow subtly, aware that disrespect could be interpreted as ignorance, or worse, as inviting misfortune. Fringe tidbit. Some scholars suggest that Egyptians even attributed moods to objects, believing that a misaligned pot or a cracked jar could anger a deity or attract malevolent spirits. You touch a slightly chipped jar and instantly feel guilty, imagining a tiny divine scolding that you might have just earned. You remind yourself to breathe, but every inhalation carries the scent of dust, grain, and incense lingering from yesterday's rituals. You continue across the courtyard, noticing miniature statues, crocodiles, falcons, and cats, placed at regular intervals. Their presence is both protective and intimidating, as if tiny agents of divine will are watching your every move. You recall Section 7's temple experience and smile faintly, thinking, judgment seems to follow me everywhere here. You bend slightly to inspect a small offering, a meager pile of dates and grains. The smell is sweet and earthy, oddly comforting despite the pressure of cosmic observation. Historians still argue whether household deities like Bes or Taret function more as protective symbols or active agents of daily moral enforcement. To your modern brain, the distinction is irrelevant. Your entire movement strategy now centers on appeasement, subtlety, and not tripping over anything sacred. A small child darts past, giggling, and tips over a clay figurine of a falcon. Your stomach flips. You barely manage to catch it before it shatters. The child looks shocked, the parents look alarmed, and you suddenly understand that accidents here carry social and spiritual consequences, however minor. Quirky tidbit. Egyptians sometimes performed small rituals to apologize to objects believed to be imbued with divine presence, a sort of ancient insurance policy against misfortune. You mutter a quick apology, hoping the universe is listening. You wander into a narrow alleyway between two homes, and your senses are inundated with the visual and olfactory tapestry of daily life. Baskets of herbs, drying fish, the faint tang of animal hides. Every item could be a potential symbol or charm. Even a stray cat slinking along the wall feels like an emissary of Bast, observing and judging. You realize that you've begun to walk softly, almost tiptoeing, not out of fear of physical obstacles, but out of habit formed by millennia of divine vigilance. Joke number 2 surfaces quietly. I didn't sign up for a daily obedience trial administered by the Pantheon. The thought makes you smirk, but you immediately check your posture, your hands and your eyes, half expecting a celestial eye roll for inappropriate amusement. You pause at a small shrine embedded in the wall of a shop, adorned with tiny golden beads and painted hieroglyphs. You try to decipher the symbols, recalling lessons from temple visits, Section 7, and your limited encounters with scribes in Section 6. The meaning eludes you, and a twinge of anxiety creeps in. Misreading sacred symbols could be socially mortifying if nothing else. You bow lightly, whispering a vague hope that your intentions are understood, and continue on. Smoke from cooking fires drifts through the alley, curling around offerings and objects in mysterious patterns. You notice that even the placement of everyday objects, loaves of bread, jars of oil, bundles of reeds, follows patterns you do not yet comprehend. Fringe tidbit. Some households arranged objects according to astrological or spiritual principles, a system historians still debate as either practical superstition or sophisticated symbolic communication. You try not to overthink, though your modern analytical brain is itching to categorize, measure, and interpret. Crossing into the market square, you encounter vendors offering goods, grains, fruits, textiles, each stall adorned with protective charms, small statues and hieroglyphs meant to bless the trade. Your presence is noted, and you instinctively bow slightly, wondering if this is ritual courtesy, social politeness, or actual divine appeasement. The answer likely lies in all three. You attempt to barter for a small jar of honey, fumbling the transaction, and feel a faint spiritual tremor of embarrassment. You imagine an invisible deity judging your negotiation skills, sigh, and decide to simply hand over the coins without protest. The sensory overload is dizzying. Colors, smells, voices, dust, and the constant, subtle awareness of divine scrutiny. You pause by a small statue of a seated ibis, Thoth's representation, and marvel at the detail. Joke number 3 sneaks in. If I survive today without offending half the gods in this square, I deserve a medal. The ibis seems unimpressed, a reminder that divine patience is long, but not infinite in your human experience. You tread carefully through narrow alleys lined with jars, baskets, and tiny shrines, noting the recurring presence of deities in the most mundane corners. Even a pile of discarded reeds carries symbolic weight, meant to shield, protect, or honor in ways that you barely understand. Historians still argue whether this omnipresence of gods created a genuine spiritual awareness or simply a social conditioning tool to maintain order. But as you step lightly past a jar that might be a divine messenger, you feel the practical effect: heightened vigilance. The day wanes and the sun casts long shadows across the courtyard and market, elongating objects, turning statues into eerie silhouettes. You pause to observe a small shrine where offerings of fruit have begun to wilt. A passing priest or devout citizen adjusts a figure, rearranges offerings, and mumbles a chant that you do not comprehend. The ambient hum of devotion, daily life, and latent anxiety weaves into your senses, creating an invisible tapestry of expectation and attention. By evening, your body is exhausted from navigating not just the physical landscape, but the dense overlay of spiritual significance in every. The market swallows you immediately, a chaotic swirl of voices, smells, and colors that your modern brain cannot process quickly enough. Vendors shout, haggling aggressively, clashing with the braying of donkeys and the occasional bark of a small dog weaving between your ankles. Joke number 1 drifts through your thoughts. Whoever said shopping is relaxing clearly never experienced 3000 BCE street commerce. You clutch your small pouch of coins and try to focus on your goal. Obtain food, textiles, and maybe a curious trinket without offending anyone or becoming donkey fodder. A mainstream historical fact grounds you. Ancient Egyptian markets were the lifeblood of urban centers. People from villages and towns brought grain, vegetables, fish, and crafted goods, all bartered directly with merchants who had no patience for clueless newcomers. Your modern reflex to browse casually is a liability. Here, hesitation signals ignorance or weakness, and both are expensive mistakes. You sidestep a laden donkey, grateful your sandals don't flip, and nearly collide with a vendor holding a basket of dates. Fringe tidbit. Some Egyptians believed that certain items, especially charms, amulets, or freshly baked goods, could carry protective or magical properties. You pause to inspect a tiny statuette of Bess, considering buying it to ward off bad luck. But then remember that you can barely carry a jug of water without stumbling. You decide the deity's protection might not extend to your modern clumsiness. The haggling begins, and you quickly realize that your attempts at negotiation are catastrophically amateurish. You offer too little, then overcompensate, and every misstep is met with raised eyebrows, subtle snorts, or tooting from seasoned market-goers. You try a cheerful smile, but it seems to confuse the locals more than charm them. You reflect bitterly on Section 10, realizing that misreading divine cues in shrines was stressful but at least didn't involve negotiating prices while simultaneously dodging livestock. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptian marketplaces were strictly competitive or functioned with an underlying social etiquette that softened interactions. You can tell from experience that the theory only partially helps. Practically, a misjudged offer might result in a grumbling vendor and occasionally, a light shove from a distracted passerby. You attempt to reclaim some dignity by focusing on counting your coins carefully, your fingers sticky with grain dust from yesterday's chores. Joke number 2 surfaces. If I survive today without insulting half the merchants and getting trampled, I deserve a vacation. Your inner voice is sarcastic but accurate. The market is not forgiving. You move between stalls with exaggerated caution, noting the patterns of human behavior like a slightly panicked anthropologist. A vendor waves you over, and you attempt to admire a small basket of figs, unaware that eye contact alone can signal interest, commitment, or bargaining intent. You buy 3 figs awkwardly, nodding excessively to indicate gratitude, hoping that your fumbling charm is sufficient. The smells are overwhelming. Fresh bread mingles with drying fish, roasted grains, and incense offered at a small roadside shrine. Your nose twitches, catching hints of herbs and the faint, sour tang of fermented milk. You recall Section 8's herbal remedies and smile faintly, noting that some aromas are comforting while others trigger mild panic. Fringe tidbit. Vendors sometimes infused goods with protective charms or symbols, believing that blessed food was more likely to attract buyers, and potentially better digestibility. You shake your head, wondering if this will come up on any modern food hygiene exam. As you navigate further, a donkey cart barrels past, narrowly missing a pair of children playing along the edge of the street. You leap sideways, clutching your pouch, and your heart races. Joke number 3 flits in. This is like Mario Kart, but the currency is ancient coins in my life. You glance at the donkey driver, who appears unbothered, accustomed to weaving through chaos as though born in a symphony of minor disasters. The social complexity is staggering. Traders signal to each other with subtle gestures, children run errands, and neighbors pass quiet messages about who owes whom. You overhear someone whispering about a recent theft, another mentioning a shipment of grain that arrived late, and a third laughing about an ill-timed fall into a mud puddle. Historians still argue whether these markets function primarily as economic hubs or as complex social networks enforcing community norms, but your lived experience blends both. Every interaction has weight, meaning, and a hint of invisible social audit. You pause at a stall selling woven mats. The vendor's eyes narrow as you fumble a question about price. You stammer, trying to estimate an appropriate offer in a currency system you barely understand. The vendor waves an elongated hand, speaking too quickly for your comprehension. You nod, smile, and hand over coins with trembling fingers, hoping your clumsiness isn't interpreted as insolence. Fringe tidbit. In some cases, markets featured ritualized bargaining where humor, charm, and performance were as important as actual money. You wonder whether your accidental comedic timing counts as participation. Sweat beads on your forehead under the midday sun, mingling with dust and the faint perfume of spices wafting from nearby baskets. Your muscles ache from dodging donkeys, bending over to inspect jars and clutching fragile goods. The market feels like a living organism, breathing, shoving, negotiating, observing, punishing, and forgiving in cycles you barely grasp. You stumble past a small shrine embedded in a stall wall, bowing reflexively, reminding yourself that gods are still watching even amidst commerce. By late afternoon you clutch your haul, dates, figs, a small amulet, and a minor decorative jar, feeling triumphant but thoroughly drained. You pause at the edge of the square, watching vendors close up their stalls, children chase one another, and donkeys lumber away. Every breath carries dust, sweat, and the lingering scent of incense and cooked grain. You take a shaky step forward, proud of surviving the sensory overload, the subtle diplomacy, and the relentless hustle of ancient Egyptian commerce. You realize that surviving a single day in the market requires vigilance. You reach the Nile, and the air immediately shifts. The dry, dusty heat of the streets is replaced by the humid, pungent scent of water, reeds, and something faintly slimy that you suspect belongs to the river itself. Joke number 1 sneaks into your mind. I didn't realize aquatic hazard was part of today's survival checklist. You step cautiously onto the muddy bank, feeling the squelch of wet sand beneath your sandals, and a shiver of nervous anticipation runs up your spine. Every ripple in the water could signal a fish, a crocodile, or worse, a glimpse of the unexpected, and you are painfully unprepared. Mainstream historical fact: the Nile was central to Egyptian life, providing food, transport, and fertile soil, but it was also home to formidable creatures. Crocodiles, catfish, and even large eels were common in the river, and their presence shaped settlement patterns and religious beliefs. You peer into the murky water, seeing the occasional glint of scales or a shadow moving beneath the surface, and you feel a thrill of anxious respect. Fringe tidbit: some Egyptians believed that certain fish carried divine or protective properties, and that touching or eating them incorrectly could bring misfortune. You hold your hands back, imagining some minor deity frowning at your clumsy modern fingers brushing against sacred waters. Better safe than sorry, you think as you take a small step backward from the bank. A slender, silvery fish darts near your toes, its body slick and fast. You lunge instinctively, nearly tripping over a clump of reeds. Joke number 2 surfaces: I didn't sign up for extreme river yoga. The fish disappears as quickly as it appeared, leaving only ripples and your own racing heartbeat. You notice that the riverbank is not a calm place. It is alive with motion, insects buzzing, birds squawking, and occasional splashes that remind you that some residents of this ecosystem have teeth and attitude. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptians exaggerated the dangers of the Nile for ritual purposes or recorded them as practical warnings. Either way, you treat every shadow with exaggerated caution, stepping lightly across wet rocks and mud. The concept of a safe swim seems laughable. Even reaching the water's edge is an exercise in anxiety management. You pause near a small fishing platform, noticing the nets and baskets left behind. Fishermen are working quietly downstream, their movements practiced, almost ritualistic as they pull in wriggling fish. You study the nets, curious about how they contain slippery, unpredictable creatures without being bitten or dragged into the water. You fumble with your own sense of coordination, realizing that your modern hands are soft, inexperienced, and incapable of even minor aquatic survival maneuvers. Quirky tidbit: Egyptians sometimes trained cats to catch fish along riverbanks, believing the feline's agility and instinct could supplement human effort. You glance at a small feline lounging lazily nearby, watching you with what seems like amused contempt. Yep, judged by cats too, perfect. The water glistens in the late afternoon sun, reflecting a dazzling array of colors, but you barely notice. Your focus is survival, avoiding slippery rocks, unseen fish, and the potential for more formidable creatures lurking beneath. Crocodiles, ancient texts warn, could grow enormous, lurking silently until the slightest movement triggers their ambush. You sidestep overhanging reeds, imagining a predator's eyes just beneath the surface, and keep your pace deliberate, careful, almost reverent. A particularly large catfish splashes near the bank, startling a bird into flight. You flinch, nearly toppling into the water yourself. Joke number 3 drifts through your thoughts: I'm not swimming with this kind of attitude without a signed waiver. You glance downstream, seeing fishermen haul in nets full of squirming creatures, and you marvel at their calm expertise. Each fish pulled from the river is greeted with a quick blessing, a pat, and a measured release of certain species back into the Nile, a routine you will never master. Historians still argue whether crocodile worship and related rituals were attempts at divine appeasement or practical warnings disguised as religion. Whatever the case, you feel both reverence and terror, acutely aware that you are not the apex being in this watery world. Every splash, glint of scale, and swish of tail reminds you that survival here is a negotiation with creatures far more adapted to this environment than your soft, modern self. You step into a neighborhood where every glance, every step, and every word is under a microscope you didn't know existed. The cobbled streets and low mud brick homes carry more than dust. They carry gossip, observation, and a rigid hierarchy that you didn't sign up for. Joke number 1 pops up automatically. Apparently, I am not just visiting ancient Egypt. I am auditioning for social disgrace. You realize quickly that even breathing in the wrong direction could spark whispered commentary or the raised eyebrows of a superior. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient Egyptian society was highly stratified, with pharaoh at the top, followed by nobles, scribes, artisans and farmers, each class bound by explicit and implicit rules. You accidentally wander into a more prestigious courtyard, hoping your sandals don't betray you, and feel the weight of invisible barriers. Even gestures like how you hold a basket or bow can signal rank, or, more dangerously, disrespect. Fringe tidbit. Some Egyptians carried small charms not just for protection, but as subtle indicators of their social standing, almost like wearable resumes. You catch a glimpse of a neighbor adjusting a tiny amulet on their wrist and feel your modern lack of flair is a glaring liability. Maybe I need one that says, "I am humble and clueless," you think, half joking, half panicking. Historians still argue whether etiquette rules were universally enforced or adapted flexibly by local communities, but your experience suggests that interpretation is not on your side. You try to smile politely at a passing artisan, but your uneven grin seems to signal both contempt and confusion simultaneously, an accident likely to spawn stories tomorrow. Joke number 2 drifts in. Step right up, folks. Watch a time traveler fail etiquette in 3, 2, 1. Your stomach knots, realizing that each social misstep could ripple, turning a minor oversight into a scandal in minutes. Children whisper at your approach, mothers glance suspiciously, and even the cats watching from rooftops appear judgmental. You dodge a small dog, trying to maintain posture while simultaneously performing mental calculations of potential social fallout. Every movement is a calculation. Should you bow lower? Smile wider? Keep walking as if confident? The ancient Egyptians were masters of subtle cues, head tilts, foot positioning, hand gestures, and you are a walking, flailing counterexample. You remember back to section 10, where divine moods were inscrutable, and realize that human hierarchies can be just as intimidating, if not more. You overhear snippets of conversation. Did you see the stranger mishandle the basket? And feel a mild surge of panic. Fringe tidbit. In some communities, rumors spread faster than actual news, and a minor faux pas could lead to weeks of whispered gossip. You adjust your sandals, hoping the sound of your footfalls doesn't draw more attention, though it already seems inevitable. The complexity extends to chores, greetings, and even meal-sharing rituals. Offering the wrong hand, mispronouncing a name, or misunderstanding the order of seating at a communal table could all be socially fatal. You realize that unlike modern anonymity, this society leaves almost no room for error. Your modern intuition, treating everyone equally, fails spectacularly because here, equality is a concept to be navigated carefully, not assumed. Historians still argue whether gossip functioned purely as social control or as a communal bonding tool, but from your perspective, the line is thin. You catch a mother gesturing at you with a raised brow, and you panic, imagining you've committed some faux pas you don't even understand. Every neighbor, every passerby becomes a judge in a system whose rules were invisible at birth but utterly consequential. You try to maintain composure as you navigate narrow alleys and shared courtyards. Your modern self is loud, oblivious, and independent. The Egyptians are subtle, observant, and strategic. Every nod, bow, and avoidance carries meaning. You almost trip over a stray bundle of reeds and curse silently, realizing that such minor accidents might be interpreted as disrespect or clumsiness indicative of low status. Joke number 3 surfaces. Congratulations, you've just invented social anxiety circa 3000 BCE. You step carefully past a group of children playing near a well, aware that every misjudged step, misaligned smile, or misinterpreted gesture could spark a domino effect of gossip. You glance over at a scribe, impeccably composed, and admire the effortless mastery of social navigation that seems centuries ahead of your own abilities. Despite the overwhelming pressure, you notice patterns. Courtyards, stairways, and market corners each have their own rules, their own invisible surveillance systems. People move with practiced awareness, using posture and eye contact to communicate not just status, but expectations. You are acutely aware that your modern bluntness, your impulsive reactions, and your desire for simple clarity are liabilities in a society structured around nuance. By sunset, you've learned a crucial survival lesson. Knowledge of social rules is as important as strength, stamina, or skill. Even when you don't understand a rule, paying careful attention to reactions and adjusting behavior accordingly is essential. You brush off dust from your clothes, trying to smile convincingly, aware that it is the only armor you have against misinterpretation and judgment. The neighborhood hums with activity, whispers, and quiet assessment. You realize that each step, each glance, each breath carries weight. Your modern assumptions of casual friendliness are replaced with deliberate, measured gestures. You exit the final alley, muscles tense but mind alive with lessons in humility, observation, and the subtle art of survival in a society ruled as much by eyes and whispers as by laws. Night descends like a velvet curtain, thick and oddly oppressive, and you notice immediately that darkness is not the calm friend you expected. Joke number 1 whispers in your mind, who knew night could be so loud? The street's empty, yes, but the quiet is deceptive. Somewhere nearby, a donkey brays. Somewhere else, water trickles from a poorly sealed canal. Insects hum, wings brushing softly against the walls, and a distant owl, or is it a bird sacred to Thoth? Calls intermittently, a sound both beautiful and vaguely unsettling. Every noise stretches across your imagination, hinting at unseen eyes, crawling feet, or scuttling rodents. Mainstream historical fact: ancient Egyptian homes were often constructed with mud bricks and reed mats, creating spaces that amplified nocturnal sounds rather than muffling them. You lie down on a roughly woven mat, feeling the stiffness of your bed, and immediately note how every creak, groan, and whisper of wind sneaks into your consciousness. You pull the thin blanket closer, realizing that the structure itself conspires with the night to ensure you remain hyper-aware. Fringe tidbit: Egyptians believed that certain sounds at night could signal the presence of spirits, both protective and malevolent. You hear what could be the gentle scuffle of a rat, or perhaps the approach of a mischievous house spirit, ready to judge your lack of local knowledge. At least it's polite enough not to roar, you think, trying to settle your pulse while imagining a tiny invisible auditor perched on the edge of your mat. Historians still argue whether nighttime rituals or protective charms were practical or purely symbolic, but you notice that the pervasive cultural concern for night safety has a definite psychological effect. You jump at each unfamiliar rustle, your senses keen, your modern desensitization stripped away. Every shadow seems larger than life, every scratch louder, every whisper more deliberate. The air feels cooler now but not comfortable. You feel it brush over sweat-damp skin and through your hair, carrying smells of the Nile, cooking fires that still linger, and the earthy scent of mud drying overnight. A bat flits overhead, its wings slicing the air so silently you barely see it, and you shiver, partly from the unexpected movement, partly from the realization that animals thrive at hours when you are most vulnerable. You hear footsteps on the path outside, deliberate, careful, human. Perhaps a neighbor returning late from the fields or temple work. Your imagination fills in stories. Maybe a thief, maybe a wandering scribe delivering urgent messages, maybe someone out to check that every household charm is properly placed. Joke number 2 surfaces. And here I thought my Netflix notifications were stressful. Fringe tidbit: some records suggest that ancient Egyptians placed small amulets or figurines near their beds to ward off nocturnal spirits. You glance around your own improvised sleeping area, half wishing for a tiny statue of Bes or Tauret to appear beside you. Anything to reassure you that the nighttime orchestra of creatures, spirits, and creaking structures is not actively plotting your demise. Historians still argue whether these nocturnal anxieties shaped religious practice or were reflections of natural human caution. But you feel the effect personally. Every sound seems to demand attention. The drip of water, the distant call of a night bird, the rustle of reeds outside the window, they are part lullaby, part alert signal. Sleep is a fragile negotiation between exhaustion and vigilance. You try lying flat, but the mat resists, uneven and lumpy. Each adjustment brings new pressure points, new sensations of discomfort that amplify your awareness of the night. You notice the subtle movements of the ceiling reeds above, almost imperceptible, but your ears catch them. A small gecko scuttles along the wall, its tiny claws sound like tiny taps on wood. You focus on your breathing, trying to slow the rhythm of your heart that reacts to every new noise. Joke number 3 drifts in. I didn't realize counting sheep would require a degree in nocturnal Egyptian zoology. You close your eyes, but the brain's spotlight lingers on the gaps in darkness, anticipating movement. The thin moonlight casts elongated shadows, bending familiar shapes into potentially threatening figures. A low murmur in the distance could be humans, or could it be spirits, protective, mischievous, or just bored? Your imagination fills in gaps with stories both ridiculous and mildly terrifying. You hear the river nearby, its water lapping softly against the banks, carrying the subtle scent of mud and vegetation. The sound should be calming, and in some ways it is, but under the weight of new ears attuned to every nuance, even this natural rhythm becomes part of the nighttime symphony, a reminder that life continues in complexity even when you are trying to rest. As you finally begin to relax, you reflect on the constant vigilance required to survive in ancient Egypt. During the day there are sun, labor, social traps, and creatures. At night there are sounds, spirits, and shadows. The cycles are relentless, each demanding respect and awareness, and you feel the cumulative weight of hours spent trying to navigate unfamiliar rules, environments, and expectations. Sleep, when it comes, is not guaranteed, and the mind fills the gap with stories, fears, and anticipations. By the early hours, you manage to slip into shallow sleep, only to be jarred awake by a bird, a distant shout, and the occasional scratching near the walls. You breathe through it, reminding yourself that humans and animals alike inhabit this night, and that much of the anxiety is your own modern interpretation of a world that has always had its rhythms and noises. Even so, the lesson is clear. Nights in ancient Egypt are alive, demanding, and wholly unlike your modern bedroom. Respecting the night is as crucial as respecting the sun. The sun rises with merciless clarity, and you immediately regret not preparing your modern body for this assault. Joke number 1 sneaks in. Congratulations, you survived ancient Egypt's night orchestra. Welcome to its daytime demolition derby. Sweat clings to your skin, linen sticks uncomfortably, and the dust from yesterday's streets has settled into every crease and pore. Your muscles ache in ways that modern ergonomic chairs and gyms could never have prepared you for. You remember the labor, the heat, the social landmines, and your mind murmurs a quiet, sarcastic applause. Bravo, you've made it roughly 18 hours into this chaos. Mainstream historical fact: the Egyptian sun, especially along the Nile Delta, could routinely exceed 104 degrees Fahrenheit 40 degrees Celsius during harvest season, making outdoor labor brutal even for natives accustomed to it. You trudge along the dusty path toward the river, hoping for even a whisper of relief, but the heat seems to follow, bending the horizon and shimmering against mud brick walls. Your modern assumptions about sunblock, hydration, and comfort betray you horribly. Fringe tidbit: some ancient Egyptians reportedly coated their skin with a mixture of crocodile dung and resin for both sunscreen and insect repellent. You grimace at the thought. I think I'll stick to SPF 50, thank you very much, but secretly acknowledge that desperation in survival can make almost anything acceptable. Historians still argue whether these bizarre protective measures were primarily practical or symbolic, but your imagination fills in every possible scenario, and you're fairly certain you wouldn't survive a single morning without serious consequences. Even moving from one courtyard to the next feels like navigating a gauntlet of heat, social expectations, and errant animals. The day seems to conspire against you. Joke number 2 surfaces. Step right up, folks, and watch our time traveler dodge cats, goats, and flying bread at high noon. You stumble past a group of workers hauling baskets of mud bricks, each heavier than the last. Their muscles ripple with years of conditioning, sweat pouring freely, skin glistening. You attempt to lift even a modest brick and feel your wrists protest violently. The air smells of earth, sweat, and a faint hint of Nile water. You curse your modern soft hands that were never designed for hauling stone under such merciless conditions. You glance toward the river, thinking of a quick dip for relief, only to recall the crocodiles, the hippos, and the tiny but vicious water insects. Joke number 3. Ah yes, the spa experience of Death by Nile, highly recommended for thrill seekers. The combination of climate, creatures, and exhaustion is relentless. You remember the riverside misadventures from section 12, and shiver, realizing that even brief exposure would require more caution, skill, and sheer luck than you possess. Social and ceremonial obligations pile on top of physical misery. You're nudged aside by a noble on his way to a temple ceremony, bow, and hope your gesture is adequate without being overzealous. You recall the scrutiny from section 13. Every glance, gesture, or misstep could become the next neighborhood scandal. You adjust your posture, blink slowly, and try to blend in, but sweat and dust betray you. Every move you make seems exaggerated, clumsy, or somehow insulting, and the lessons of social nuance you half learned yesterday now feel like ancient riddles you were never meant to solve. Mainstream historical fact: public rituals were central to community life, and missing or misperforming them could have real social consequences. You accidentally step into the wrong courtyard during a minor ritual, and eyes follow you as if you just insulted the gods themselves. Fringe tidbit: some participants believed that even accidental faux pas could attract minor curses or ill fortune, a belief that might be more psychological than magical, but it weighs heavily on your modern mind. Historians still argue whether everyday superstitions were literal threats or mechanisms of social cohesion, but you don't have time to ponder theory, you have to survive the present. By mid-morning, exhaustion fully sets in. Your muscles ache from lifting, bending, and navigating uneven terrain. Sweat mixes with dust, the sun scorches unrelentingly, and your mind fights a fog that is at once physical and psychological. Every creature, sound, and social cue demands attention, a relentless stream of input that would overwhelm even the most experienced local. You realize the sheer volume of stimuli, from neighbor gossip to market chaos to temple rituals, creates a sensory storm that your modern brain is not equipped to handle. You stop briefly to rest under the faintest shade you can find, noting the irony that shade in ancient Egypt is not a luxury, it's a survival tool, a reprieve that locals instinctively respect and position themselves under. You sit, panting lightly, recalling Section 2's sun-melting lessons, and feel a growing appreciation for the adaptive skills required to live even a single day here. A breeze carries the smell of baking bread and fresh papyrus, reminding you of fleeting pleasures in a day that has otherwise been relentless. Even food offers no comfort. Meals are dense, unfamiliar, and require careful consumption to avoid offending hosts or upsetting your stomach. You remember Section 3, when breakfast was an adventure and your modern digestive system protested violently. You nibble at some barley bread and a small bit of beer, grateful for calories, but aware that comfort is fleeting and temporary. As the day wears on, you are painfully aware of every lesson, every struggle, every challenge that has come before. The sun, the sand, the labor, the social traps, the rivers, the animals, and the restless nights. Each element compounds the others, proving decisively that survival in this environment requires far more than curiosity. It demands instinct, adaptation, and years of learned skill. You feel humbled, amused, exhausted, and enlightened, often all at once. By late afternoon, you acknowledge a simple truth: you wouldn't last a single day here without help, preparation, and local knowledge. Even minor successes, navigating the streets, avoiding scandal, surviving the midday heat, are hard-won victories. You marvel at the resilience and resourcefulness of the ancient Egyptians who thrived under these conditions, and silently concede that your modern conveniences, skills, and assumptions are almost laughably inadequate. The sun begins its descent, shadows stretching across the mud-brick streets, and your body finally gives out. You collapse onto the nearest mat, limbs heavy, and in that exhausted surrender, you realize the truth. A single day in ancient Egypt is enough to break, humble, and overwhelm any unprepared modern visitor. The combination of climate, customs, social structures, labor, and wildlife conspires in a perfectly orchestrated demonstration of why you probably wouldn't last a day. Now let's gently wind down from that whirlwind of a day. The heat softens, the Nile glimmers gold in the fading sunlight, and your body, though exhausted, begins to relax into the rhythm of the evening. Imagine the dust settling, the bustle of the markets fading into distant echoes, and the scent of papyrus and baked bread mellowing with the cooling air. You feel the tension leave your muscles slowly, like a gentle exhale after holding your breath far too long. Sounds become softer, less urgent. You recall the strange nocturnal orchestra from Section 14, the frogs, the insects, the distant calls of birds, and now they feel almost comforting, a reminder that life continues beyond your discomfort. The sand, once gritty and insistent, now feels like a protective blanket over your skin, as if the desert itself is acknowledging your endurance and letting you rest. Even the oppressive sun seems to wink at you from behind the horizon, reminding you that relief is possible, that nothing lasts forever, not even the fiercest of days. Your thoughts drift to the people you've glimpsed, laborers, scribes, nobles, and healers. You realize that each face you passed carried not just the same struggle, but a rhythm, a mastery, a survival instinct honed over generations. There's a quiet reverence here, in understanding how life adapts to extremes, how culture, climate, and environment shape every moment. You begin to see that your own frustration and fatigue are natural, but they also highlight just how resilient those ancient humans truly were. The smell of the evening, cool Nile water, smoldering reeds, and faint smoke from hearth fires, blends into a soothing balm for your senses. You imagine yourself lying back on a simple mat, letting the day's chaos fade, acknowledging your limits without judgment. Even the lingering anxieties of social faux pas, sunburn, and missteps dissolve in this slower tempo. Your heartbeat slows. Breathing deepens. The noises of life, the occasional splash, the soft rustle of leaves, the murmur of distant voices, become part of a lullaby, grounding you in this imagined yet vivid ancient space. You let go of any lingering tension in your shoulders, unclench your jaw, and allow your mind to float free of yesterday's modern comforts and today's extraordinary challenges. With each gentle inhale and exhale, you feel a sense of completion. The journey has been exhausting, illuminating, and sometimes absurd, but it has also been full of wonder. You realize that the world of ancient Egypt, with all its intensity, is more than a series of obstacles. It is a living, breathing culture with layers of meaning, ritual, and adaptation that modern life can scarcely replicate. And as your thoughts soften, your imagination begins to drift toward dreams, carrying the warmth of the Nile, the aroma of herbs and bread, and the soft murmur of a civilization long past. Let this quietness fill you, let it calm you, and let it remind you that you've traveled far without leaving your own bed. The day is over, the lessons have been absorbed, and your mind can finally rest.